Hello everyone. So, I have a video for you today. Now I am working on another video which I've told a couple of people about and they're probably waiting for, but that video is taking longer than anticipated. But in the meantime, I have another video for you. And the other night I was working on a sheath for this Nesmuk Skinner in a live video chat with Niels Vandenberg. And if you don't follow him on Facebook, you should, because you'll get links to be able to watch these live chats with knife makers. And while we all work together on, working on our various projects, we chat and talk about bladesmithing and knife blacksmithing and all sorts of cool stuff, and have a few laughs as well. But while I was on the last one, I showed a device that I built for a very specific task that Niels actually requested I make a video on, because he wants to shamelessly steal the idea, which I am 100% behind, because I think everybody who makes knives should have one. So what I'm going to do is, I was horribly prepared for this video. I'm going to grab a demonstration aid. I'll be right back. There we go, much better. Now I'm more prepared. So once you have forged or stock removed your blade, and you go to do your heat treatment, you normalize like I always say, and you will quench either by hanging it like I say in my heat treatment video, or being very precise with the insertion, whatever your method of quenching is. And no matter how well you plan, every so often it happens, you get a warp, and warps suck. They really, really do. And by warp, if you're new to the craft and you're not sure about this, or maybe you're just so pro that you've never had a warp happen, I have here this Santoku blank, which is ground and is heat treated, but it was actually badly warped. When I say badly, I mean badly by my standards. It wasn't that warped. And by warp, I mean instead of being straight as you can see it, it actually veered off one way, and there was a divergence, a bend in it, that was about 5 to 7 degrees, which means it is no longer straight, and you need a straight knife for it to be a functional knife. So what do you do? Now, Niels was actually giving some very solid advice to somebody who asked about this particular phenomenon of heating the blade up to the temperature of the steel that you are using. So this, for example, is 52100. So I like to temper 52100 about 195 to start off with, and then move up to maybe 205, 210. Not so much because that's the correct temperature, but that's because it works well in the oven that I use. So the correct temperature is sort of subjective, because you're looking for the color that forms, the oxidation color that forms within the time period of the tempering, which for me is about hour 45, 2 hours. You want to get that nice straw gold color. And you can see I've actually blued the spine of this one as well. I did that post-temper, but Niels gave the advice, very good advice, of heating it up to that temperature, then pulling it out, and while it's sort of at that temperature, bending to correct the warps. And the best way to do that, most effective way to do that without putting too much strain on it, having good controllability, is to put it in a vise with what's called the 3-pin method. So let's just say we had this knife and the top, there was a bend here, and it pushed the top over there. So you'd put one pin at the apex of the bend, and then one at this tip, and then one the same distance away, and you would push it like that in the vise. So you'd push it 2 points from this direction, 1 point from this direction. You put it in a vise, and you crank the vise very, very slowly, and it will reverse the warp. And you want to bend it, over-bend it in the opposite direction, almost like you're trying to mirror what the warp was, but not quite all the way. And then when you let it go and relax, it should be more straight. That is one way to do it. But I said, Niels, baby, there's another way. And I showed him my device, and he thought it was super cool, and he asked if I could do a video on it. So this is what I've built, because there's another way you can correct warps during the temper cycle, and that is to do it in the temper, while the temper is happening. And so what I've done is I've created basically a adjustable 3-point pin vise. So what it is it's 2 pieces of just bar stock, and you could make this as wide or as narrow as is appropriate for the knives that you make. I plan on making a wider one of this since I've had such success with it. And there's holes at either end that I've put bolts through. and there's nuts that I can clamp it down, loosen it or clamp it as needed. And I have these 3 slidable adjustable bars, so I can actually they're a little bit tighter than I would like, and it's annoying sometimes, but they actually slide and adjust. So I can put my blade into here, adjust where the pins are to fit the bend, crank it down with a spanner to get the right tension and look for that counter bend that I was talking about, bending in the opposite direction to the warp, and then put it into the oven and temper it for the full cycle at that temper. And when I pull it out, the whole thing, I just put the entire thing in there and pull the entire thing out. And when I remove it from that clamp, it's usually pretty straight. This thing actually works wonders. Even works on littler things like this little skinner that I'm working on. This one didn't have a warp in it, luckily, but because I just didn't grind any bevels. This is just a block of steel. It's a lot easier to avoid warps when you do that. Although check out my heat treatment video to find out how to avoid warps in the first place. But they happen to the best of us. It's just one of these things. Like everyone's like, oh, you should normalize better, or control the direction your heat's coming from better, and all that sort of thing. Yes, you should do all of this anyway, but you hope for the best and you plan for the worst. And a good way to plan for the worst is to build yourself one of these. It costs about $5 to make one, and they're so easy to make. And I'm sure you can make it a lot fancier than this. These sliding pins, they are just copper bar that I just cold hammered around and then loosened a little bit so that I can actually slide them around. And to be honest, most of the time I don't even need a spanner, just because of the pressures involved. I can just undo it by hand, like so, and that allows me to open it enough to be able to take my blade blank, adjust where the pins are, slide it in there, and you can see it sits there. And what I'll do, let's see if I can get a good angle here. As I squeeze, see how it bends the blade blank? The pressure you can actually get with that focusing into those 3 points is quite incredible. And once you get the amount of bend right by, say, squeezing this end, all you have to do is just tighten those up. You can go to the other end, squeeze it, tighten it up. I don't even use a spanner, to be honest, it just works. And then all of a sudden I have, I don't know if you can see that, a nice subtle bend to it. And I can safely bend this one because this has been beautifully tempered and had a blued spine, so it's a very flexible and strong blade, which is a sign of a good heat treatment. So I can use it for demonstration purposes. But when a blade is bending and you don't want it to, that's a bit of a problem. So doesn't leave any mars on the blade, which is why I opted for copper, not just because it's easy to shape those pins, but copper is very, very soft and it's not going to scratch up your steel surface or leave any gouges, which high pressure of steel on steel might do. So I highly recommend using a non-ferrous softer metal to do that. And yeah, that is that pretty much. It's a really simple thing to build, and it can save you a lot of headaches. And if you are batching out knives, you can make these so cheaply. You can have 10 ready to go. I mean, you can still use this in the buried sand temper method that I talk about in that heat treatment video that I put out. It still works. You just got to be a bit more thorough in getting the sand all the way in there to make sure all the voids are filled and you've got sand contacting as much of it as possible. But to be honest, I find that I don't have to because it just bar stock steel absorbs a lot of heat anyway, so it actually helps even out the temperature. But hopefully this has helped. I use it every time I get a warp, and it has actually only ever not been able to save one blade, and that was because I still have, to this day, I have no idea what happened, but I had both a cupping, I had a warp once where it was actually cupped this way, not this way, it was cupped this way and twisted. It was the most bizarre, awful warp ever, but it was a scrap steel blade, And that's going to happen when you work with scrap steel sometimes. It's a risk you take. Luckily, it was a knife that I was just making for me. It wasn't anything important, because I tend to use scrap steel on things that are important unless the person specifically asks for it. So it wasn't too big of a deal to throw away, but it's the only knife that has not been able to have a warp corrected by that jig. Every other one that has ever been warped since I built it has been able to be fixed. Even if you have 2 warps, you just do 2 different temper cycles and use the jig on each of the warps on each of the temper cycles, and it works great. So build one of those, add it to your shop. I give it to you freely. I hope you enjoy it. I have been getting requests to sell them on my Etsy store. I don't know if that's going to happen. It might. I might do a limited run if you can't be bothered making one yourself. But yeah, hopefully, Niels, that has given you a nice thorough description of that tool, and I would like to see you building one for your own shop. Not that a knife maker of your caliber has many warps, but like I said, it happens to the best of us. Anyway, if you guys found that informative, be sure to subscribe and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Check out my Etsy store. I'm selling a few of my knives on there at the moment. All the links are in the description below. I also have a Patreon where I go into all sorts of cool pro tips, including business and marketing tips, which have been getting some really rave reviews from the patrons that I have. Huge big thank you to everyone who supports my work, especially in times like this. It means the world. I cannot possibly, words are paltry things and cannot adequately explain what it means to me to get your support. So I will see you guys on the next video. I hope you're all doing well. Catch you later.